My name is Sandy Keeter, and I'm a professor at Seminole State College, and have also worked with O'Donnell for about 5 years on course reviews, building, and learning design. Our session today is going to be a great one. It should be about an hour, including interactive discussions and Q&A. I hope you all brought pens and paper for the exercises. You will notice the chat button at the bottom of the screen. Please introduce yourselves in that group area and make sure all panelists and attendees is selected from the drop-down. Also use the chat throughout the session to share comments with the entire group and put any questions you have in that space. Please also note there's an option to turn on live transcription in the Zoom control bar. Our session today will be led by Brett Christie, O'Donnell Learn's Vice President of Learning Design and Inclusivity. Brett has worked in higher education for over 25 years with extensive experience leading teaching and learning initiatives that involve a myriad of stakeholders. Many of these efforts have included course redesign for more innovative and effective uses of technology, including quality online course design and delivery. Brett is known as an expert in applying universal design for learning as a means for greater equity, accessibility, and inclusivity. As a first-generation college student himself, Brett is particularly invested in ways to close equity gaps that exist in post-secondary education. Now I'll hand it over to Brett to briefly introduce himself and our wonderful guests and get us started with today's session. Over to you, Brett.
All right, thanks, Sandy. Well, Brett's not going to say much about Brett. I appreciate all of that. That's plenty. But I do want to make a little bit of connection to who's here with me today and how excited I am. So yeah, in my background, working in the CSU for 25 years, I've gotten to work with a network, a system of so many amazing people, faculty, staff, students, otherwise. And two of those folks are here today. I'm fortunate to have known Kim probably 10 years, Kim at Humboldt State, now Cal Poly Humboldt, rebranded, and then also Megan from CSU Channel Islands. And they have been just so great in some of the efforts that I've been able to be part of system-wide, but also what they do locally at their campuses and working with their faculty and serving their students. And then also the thought leadership and thought partnership that we're involved in together, I really appreciate. So I'm excited to have them share with me today and lead a session. So let's go ahead and go, Kim.
Thank you, Brett. Yeah, I appreciate the introduction. Again, my name is Kim Vincent Layton. I'm an educational developer in the Center for Teaching and Learning at Cal Poly Humboldt. Also teach part-time in the School of Education. And Brett, I think it's been longer than 10 years. I think sometimes we feel like we're in a time warp. So because I know I'm thinking it's probably been more like 14 years, but anyways, who's counting, right? It's been great to work with Brett and great to partner with O'Donnell Learn, and I'm really excited to be here today.
Megan.
Hi, my name is Megan Eberhard-Alstad. I am our learning design lead for teaching and learning innovations at CSU Channel Islands. I'm excited to see some colleagues in the audience today, so thanks for being here. Yes, I love working with Kim and Brett both. This has been just a joyful endeavor, and I look forward to getting to interact with everyone here today.
Great, thank you both, and thanks everybody for contributing in the chat. It's great to share, what you do, where you are in the chat, and we really believe that webinars should have that open chat. It should be able to show who the participants are, so that it feels like a community. That it's an experience we're having together. We're not just talking to you or at you. Today's session, Agreements for Self-Care. This is an adaptation of a session that we did earlier in the month at the Lilly Conference in San Diego. And if you haven't been to a Lilly Conference, it's such a powerful community that focuses on practical aspects of teaching and learning. And so we were thrilled to be able to share that at the Lilly Conference. And we were thrilled that the response was so great during the session, but also we got asked to write an article for their scholarly journal for the International Teaching and Learning Collaborative. So we'll be taking this work a little bit further and excited about that as well. Today's session is one in a four-part series that we're calling a continuum of care. And we had one back in the fall, late fall, heading into the break actually, that was focused on faculty burnout and the research that we've done. And I'll touch upon that briefly. And then we have today's session and a couple others coming up. And I'm sorry, I have puppies below me here that are a little bit geared up right now. All right, so formal titles and contact information there. Should you want to get in touch with us afterwards, that would be great. And let's make sure for today's session, we do want to make it as interactive as possible. So with the QR code or with the URL, we've got a handout for you. And we did in the session reminder ask you to have paper handy and a writing implement. Hopefully in your office or your setting, you've already got something like that. But we also are offering a handout that's custom structured for some of the things that we're going to go through today, because we want to make this engaging. We want to make this a process for you. We're not just talking about research. We're not just telling you the way things are or should be. We want to engage you in some thought around this as well, and also hear from you in different ways. So we've got some different types of activities planned for today. So let's go ahead and get the link. Oh, we have the link in the chat. Perfect. Thank you. And let's share the emails either during the session or at the end. We'll get those back up. Absolutely. Thanks, Anne. Appreciate that. Okay. So let me go forward then. You've either got the QR to the handout or you've got the URL in the chat. And let's dive in, and I'm just going to give you just a few minutes on our research that kind of props up why self-care is so important. We all know about burnout and what we've been through for the last few years and what we've been carrying even before that, and what things look like going forward in this newer reality. But we actually did our own research as well, and we've got some findings to share that connect to this very closely. So that critical call for care and support. So we surveyed 530 higher education faculty. This was from fall 2022, so very recent, and we processed and analyzed the data going into the holiday break. And actually we presented on this at AAC&U on this study just about 2 weeks ago, not even that. And great session that we had there, a lot of engagement around the topic. And actually we got asked to write an article about that one. So that's nice as well. This whole continuum of care is something that we're feeling good about. You can see that we did full-time, part-time adjuncts. We did 4-year, 2-year public and private. So we tried to have a really broad representation. And then the main themes there was on their approach, faculty's approach to course design and teaching, how they spend their time, and then their values and attitudes toward their jobs. So some brief highlights. These are self-report data. And this is what we asked faculty about how they spend time planning and preparing for their course. So prior to the start of the semester, if it's a new course, a new prep, they're going to spend about 38 hours, they say, on prepping, getting ready for the launch of the semester. If it's an existing course that they're tweaking, revising, then it's going to be less than half, about 14 hours. Now, once the semester launches, they're saying they spend about 7 hours on their course, on each course. And now multiply that. If they've got 4 courses going during a term, some said they had more, 6, 7 courses, crazy numbers. But if you look at 4 courses happening, then you're looking at 420 hours during the semester. You're looking at 25 to 30 hours just on teaching that course. That doesn't take into effect other duties that they may have if they're doing research and creative activities, they're doing service, they're doing all their meetings and things like that. So it's quite a heavy load. And what they told us, 55% of them said they don't have enough time to teach their courses effectively. So yes, time is a factor, but also the care and support can be a factor as well. So there's some of the quantifiable things, but we're looking at qualitative aspects more and more. And we're going to be digging into the qualitative research in this report going forward. What they enjoy most about their role, it's that light bulb moment was number 1, when students grasp a lesson, or it could be related to a threshold concept related to their field, and students grasp that concept, and they're able to really move over the threshold and very deep into the discipline and even toward the field. They enjoy the group interactions. Inspiring lectures, I would ask, inspiring to whom? Is it their own judgment, or are they hearing that those are inspiring? They had stated that's what they enjoy. And then seeing a student get a job offer or acceptance to a grad program. So those are the top 4 reasons. Now we dug a little bit deeper. Yes, PowerPoint, absolutely. You'll get as a follow-up, and the recording. Thanks, Aaron. So how faculty spend their time. Creating content and modules was the first thing. Creating assessments, lecture prep, keeping content fresh or updated, and curating resources and materials. And if you look at that, there's a heavy focus on content, and content is important to a certain extent. But at the same time, we ask these instructors, what is important for the student experience? So these are the same folks. And this is what they told us was important about the student experience, that engagement, that regular feedback, clear expectations, student connectiveness, effective assessments, accessibility. Those are the main things that jumped out, and you can see some of the others. So we saw maybe a little bit of disconnect between what they might be doing and focusing on, but what they saw as valuable for the student experience. And so part of that can be workload. We're digging into that further. Part of that could be their capacity or their knowledge on how to do some of these things more effectively, their comfort level. So we're looking at that as well. And that's where we're really supporting faculty in some of these areas that you see on the right, because they're trained to be subject matter experts, deep thinkers on their discipline, on their knowledge area. But they aren't trained necessarily to do the things on the right that are so critical. So that's just a quick snapshot of our report. And so we've got the QR code there for you to be able to access the full report there. And then toward the end of today's session, I'll talk about the rest of the presentations we're doing under this continuum of care and how we're kind of expanding on that. And there's the link for you as well. All right. And I won't pause for any questions or anything like that related to the report, because that was just to sort of prop up a little bit of context about the faculty condition, if you will, and then get us into this notion of self-care. So as a segue, what we want to do is go to this answer garden. You can choose QR code and do it on your mobile if you want to, or we've got the URL in the chat for you. And what you want to do with this answer garden, I'll jump to there in a moment as well, is you want to just give us some quick thoughts in 20 characters or less. What brings you joy as an educator? And just put in one at a time, and you can do multiple. And I have it limited to 20 characters to try and keep those succinct. And then that's where we'll see ones that kind of pile up as the most frequent. So let's go to that live tag generation or cloud generation here. And I'll do some updating. This is a free tool that is so easy to use and a good way to kind of do a pulse check with your students going in. And I know that some of the polling software out there will do this as well, but this is an easy one to do that's browser-based. And it's also mobile friendly. If for some reason you're having trouble with the technology, you can also put a response into chat. Feel free to do that. That's always a good backup. So student success, jumping out right away. Yeah, isn't it all about the students? And so it's good to remind ourselves about that and remind those around us sometimes about that, mentoring students. So that's a particular type of effort towards student success. Great. Engagement, spark, connections. Let me do another refresh. It only refreshes periodically, so I'll keep doing that manually. Working with curious minds. I love that. Yeah, curiosity is huge. And that triggers for me the affective domain. How do you tap into that affective domain that can get overlooked? Awesome. Student growth, student engagement. A lot of students excited. Student eureka, or those aha moments. Yes. Students getting it. So seeing some similarities, different wordings for the same things. That's great. Learning community. Love that one. It's all about the community, the class as community. Light bulb moments. Great. Thank you, Heather. And Gail, thank you. Okay, we'll load one more time and then we'll step back out of this. And if this serves you for any purpose, feel free. You can do a screen capture or whatever and use it for any conversations you might be having related to the topics here today. All right, thank you everybody for participating, and we look forward to digging a little bit deeper into that picture. All right, so let's jump back to the session and I'll turn it over to Megan for a bit.
Thank you, Brett. I loved seeing the word student just continue to pop up in that answer garden, right? That's what our common focus, our vision is that student success. But today, we really do want to address how the last couple of years have really been what we could call unique in education. While we would like to talk about all the positives that we've seen emerge in our conversations around with emergency remote instruction, we have this heightened awareness of our dedication to inclusion and to empathy and allyship, but we also need to acknowledge the toll that living in flux has taken on the lives of educators. And so we're continually seeing that there's an ask to do more with less. So terms like flux, burnout, and compassion fatigue have definitely entered our lexicon. And you, students or colleagues, probably wouldn't mind setting aside terms like pivot, adapt, or flex, put them on a shelf for a little bit and set them aside. So the next activity is really meant to help give give yourself permission to acknowledge the real challenges that can, and for good reason, take away that joy from all of those wonderful aha and wonderful moments that you do experience as an educator. So this is an activity that you can actually use with your own students to help them identify some fears or concerns or challenges the first day of class, or even as a pulse check, to create an empowering opportunity to engage in discourse that can help them foster that growth mindset. And of course, part of fostering this climate for care for yourself and also for your students, I think, is captured in that quote that we saw from Brad Meltzer, which everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, so be kind always. And so today we're going to take some time to kind of be kind with ourselves and do a bit of thinking together. All right, so let's head into our activity. I'm going to invite you to kind of play an imagination game with me. This is actually an activity that I learned from Equity Unbound, which was shared as an open educational resource, thanks to Autumn Keynes, Mahabali, and Mia Zamora from Equity Unbound via 1HE. So hopefully you do have something to write with close by, nothing formal. If you have a blank piece of paper, that's great, or you have our session handout, no artistic talent required. We just want you to play along. So let's go ahead and look at the very first slide and we'll get our directions going. Okay, all you need. Oh, can we go back one slide? Thank you. All you need is Post-its or a blank piece of paper, a pencil or pen, and some imagination. And now we can head to the next slide. Thanks. Okay, so reflect on why you became an educator and take a moment to maybe think about what has chipped away at that initial passion. We're going to call these joy stealers. And so you saw the session but the data Brett shared, and maybe some of those spoke to you, but make a list on your paper on 2 to 4 joy stealers, challenging situations, people, some limitations that you're experiencing in your role as an educator. And then when we're ready, we can move on, but I want to give you a little think time. All right. Should we move to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so on one Post-it, or if you have a piece of paper, just kind of fold it in half. And I want you to draw just one squiggly sketch. So maybe make a round shape, or a 3-sided shape like a triangle, 4-sided shape, or just a squiggly line. Again, no artistic talent needed. Just draw something real quick. And then can we go ahead and move on to the next slide? All right. Okay, this is the imagination part. I want you to turn your sketch into a monster or a demon by adding teeth, hair, wings, claws, whatever you can think of that would turn your little sketch into a monster. And again, this is privately yours. So we'll give you a couple seconds to draw. And these are quick sketches that make that a monster. And Brett, when you're ready, I think we can advance. All right, what I'd like you to do is think about the quick list of joy stealers that we'll call them joy monsters that you wrote down in step 1. And what I'd like you to do is go ahead and look at your monster and think, which joy stealer does that monster represent? I want you to focus on just one. And then if you can, go ahead and write your joy stealer somewhere around your monster drawing. I wish I could see you. I'd tell you to give me a thumbs up if you were done. So I apologize if you're feeling rushed. All right. Should we go ahead and move on to the next slide?
You got it.
Thank you. Okay, so if you're still drawing and connecting, go ahead and feel free, but I'm going to continue on with now moving us into our next phase. So we're going to talk a little bit about myths and mitote and how some of our agreements can be self-limiting or a fog. So I'll explain where this came from. So in a leadership ethics course, I was introduced to the book, The 4 Agreements, and we can probably move to the next slide. And I have since recommended it to probably everybody I know, and I'm excited to share these agreements with you today. So this book was written by Don Miguel Ruiz, sharing indigenous Toltec wisdom. The book posits that as humans, we've been trained, or what Ruiz calls domesticated, to accept certain societal agreements. So based on our family, our culture, our religion, our education, we have formed these agreements that make up our own belief system, or what Ruiz calls our personal book of law, which we tend to use to define truth, and we use it to judge all of life, including ourselves, as either good or bad. These agreements can be really self-limiting, but because we've made them all throughout our lives, we may not even recognize them as being incongruent with who we actually are, or who we consider our authentic selves to be. So we are what Ruiz calls dreaming while awake. We unintentionally will view the world and ourselves as if looking through a fog, or what the Toltecs would call your mitote, based on the agreements that we've all come to blindly accept. These agreements can be the monsters that are actually stealing our joy. And we're often fearful about the consequences about breaking these rules or changing these agreements because we've become so comfortable with our self-authored book of law. So regaining our freedom begins with interrogating or really digging into those agreements and identifying the ones that are stealing our joy and breaking them and making new ones. So I want to introduce to you 4 agreements to consider. Next, all right, perfect. So the first agreement is to be impeccable with your word. And this one really is supported by the other 3 agreements that I'm going to share with you. Words can bring peace or spread poison. This begins with the words we say to ourselves, about ourselves. And if we are really to spread peace out to our students, we saw how important those students were to everybody here. We have to first say words to ourselves that are going to bring us peace and not poison our thinking. So I'd like you to take a moment and reflect. Think about the words you tell yourself. What words do you say when you're judging your teaching as an educator? What do the words you tell yourself, how do they impact your joy or your interactions with your students? And are your words back to yourself kind? All right, Brett, we can move to the next agreement. Agreement number 2, don't take anything personally. Now, this could sound kind of harsh or maybe the opposite of empathy, but no matter what others say to you, we have to stop for a moment and not take it personally. Because whatever judgment, remember, we're all walking around in our own mitote, another person makes reflects their perspective based on their book of law. So likewise, any judgments that you would make of others and yourself are grounded in that mitote. So if we agree to believe what others' judgments about us are saying, then we're actually agreeing to live in fear because we're afraid of what others are thinking about us, which will limit the way that we act. So again, we have to be mindful of our book of law, but how others' perceptions are coming from theirs. Agreement number 3, don't make assumptions. So to avoid spreading any of that poison by keeping our word impeccable, We have to quit making assumptions about others' motives for acting or speaking a certain way. Rather than assume, which is again influenced by our metote, we need to be clear and really seek clarity in situations. So first, we need to say what we mean so others understand us, and do so with integrity, again, keeping our word impeccable. We also need to seek clarity if we don't understand. So again, kind of going back to those 7 habits, right? Seek to understand and then to be understood. So this also means understanding ourselves before we make or keep or continue an agreement that could actually be stealing our joy. So are we also taking the time to reflect and think about those agreements and where those joy monsters are coming from? So I'd like you to reflect to yourself again, what assumptions are you making about what you should, can, and should not or cannot do as an educator? And how do you make time to seek clarity in yourself? Where are you making the time for that? And we know time is a precious commodity. All right, and then the last agreement is actually my favorite. This is my favorite one. Always do your best. And I think this is really challenging for educators because we want to always be our top-notch 100,000% best. But sometimes we have to accept that good is good enough, because we need to be really cautious of overextending or expending additional energy that can actually end up leaving us depleted. So I really like an analogy that Ruiz shares in the book, an anecdote of a man speaking to a Buddhist monk about reaching enlightenment. And the man asked the monk, how long will it take me to meditate or to reach enlightenment if I meditated for 4 hours a day? And the monk answers 10 years. The man asks again, well, if I meditate, what if I meditate for 8 hours? And the monk responds, 20 years. And the man is kind of puzzled. How could meditating longer take me longer? And the monk's response is pretty simple. If you can be effective in 4 hours, why do you need to spend 8? So you only have so much bandwidth. So we need to be really cautious about when we're keeping that ultra quality checker of best. We want to make sure that it's based on the circumstance and the energy that you have. Because again, if you are a rundown version of yourself, you're not going to be able to be good to yourself, and you're really not going to be helpful to anyone else. So again, as you reflect, think about, where are you expending your limited energy? Is it going towards what's most critical to your ultimate goals? Is it consistent with the demands of your life? Are you sick? Are you busy with family? What are you doing? And how can you avoid getting overly depleted?
And Megan, related to that, if I may, a couple hours ago, there was an announcement of a new podcast from Bonnie Stachowiak on how not to be perfect in teaching and learning. And I haven't had a chance to listen, obviously, because we're here together, but I thought that was great timing on that related to this agreement. And she does great work.
Absolutely. A big fan. All right, so we'll head into our last slide. So again, we want to frame these agreements that we make unintentionally, blindly, as self-limiting beliefs. And they can stem from our fears of not being good enough or not being good according to that book of law that we end up writing and not really realizing where it came from. And so as a learning designer, I've worked pretty closely with a lot of faculty, and I get to work with amazing people across all different disciplines. And I continue to hear some really common challenges that I would consider joy monsters. And I hear people constantly pouring over how they're not doing this or enough or that. And so I want to think about, when you're thinking about that monster that you drew and the joy monster you may have identified, I wonder if some of these might speak to where you're thinking right now. I've heard concerns about inconsistent student attendance. How do I reach that student who's not coming to class or not logging into my online course anymore, and they've done everything to reach out? How to respond to all those students' requests for flexibility while having empathy, but also trying to maintain your deadlines. How to ensure academic integrity without also assuming that students are cheating. How to navigate students who want more online options, but they're not necessarily prepared to be successful, or you're teaching across multiple modalities. how to support students who are missing those critical requisite knowledge. You know, we talk about little gaps here and there that have cropped up, especially coming out of the pandemic, and how to get students to accept and take help. So all of these things can be worries that we carry around and we feel ultimately responsible for. So those may be some of those joy monsters that are really encroaching on your time. So thinking about your educator's book of law, how have you come to judge yourself as an educator? Are your current agreements or laws realistic, or are they becoming self-limiting? And do your laws represent your authentic self as an educator? All right, and we have an activity coming up, some interaction. Again, I've been talking at you for a while, where we'd love to get some of your input. So shall we head over? If you can either use the link to go to a Padlet or the QR code, we would really appreciate you taking a moment and sharing those joy monsters. So if you could write down what are some of those self-limiting agreements that you may be experiencing. Keep in mind the Padlet's anonymous, so you can share your thoughts safely, freely, and then if you're not up to sharing, you should have the option to also vote or thumbs up if you're resonating with something shared from somebody else.
Great, and I'll take us there now, so you'll see the live view. We'll all see each other's, and yeah, instead of doing the thumbs up, I didn't do that because there's also a thumbs down, and I didn't want any of those. I did the heart or like feature, so
Yes.
Feel free to like on somebody else's comment.
Excellent, thank you. Right. And if one of those joy stealers seems to connect with one of the 4 agreements, feel free to place it there. Again, this is how you are perceiving your agreements. Yes, the best is based on my context, and it's constantly changing. The first email of the day can change what your context is going to be. Right. That's a great question about the clarity of instruction. A lot of big questions right now around what is essential for students to do.
I see team members not working together. I'm not sure if that's in regard to faculty departments not working together, communicating, instead working in isolation.
Student evaluations, that can be a rough, those can be really personal. I've been in that seat too. I've been a lecturer in our School of Education, and you pour everything in and then you look at those comments. Yes. All right. Thank you for sharing. Continue to post to the Padlet. And now that I've taken us down the road of doom and gloom, I'm going to hand it off to Kim. She's going to bring us back to joy.
Great.
Thanks,
and also
Megan.
note, sorry, Kim, also note that you'll have access ongoing to the Padlet. So if you want to go back in and reflect or see what others have stated, so that gives you more reflection, then feel free. Same with the answer garden as well. All right, let me take us back.
Thank you for sharing in the chat and on the Padlet. All right, Kim, joy, we need joy.
Joy. Okay. Who's ready for joy? Okay.
Please.
Well, so, you know, when I reflect on and listening to Megan as she's been talking and reading some of the things that people are writing, when I reflect on the 4 agreements, I would say that one of my greatest joys as an educator is building relationships with my students and with my colleagues. And with that in mind, I want to start out by introducing you to a joyful practice known as warm demander pedagogy. Maybe some of you have heard of this, or perhaps you use it in your teaching, or even contextualizing it to your working environment. So this approach is really centered on fostering trusting relationships with our students. And it came about in the 1970s through the research of an individual named Judith Kleinfeld, where she developed a theoretical model of teacher characteristics that positively or negatively influenced the academic engagement of Indigenous students. Now, Kleinfeld found that rather than separating those interpersonal elements from the learning, which is kind of more of a, what I would say, a Western approach, bringing the highly interpersonal aspects into learning, such as relationships, actually build trust that supports students and fuels them to work harder. So we noted that in some of the data that Brett talked about earlier in the very beginning of our session about how important interactions are to teachers. So hence, these teachers became known as warm demanders. And this really highlights the importance of that interdependence of cognition, so the learning, and then the emotions or the affective elements, which cannot be separated. Even if we think we're trying to do that, we cannot do that. And her work has really been used throughout all of education, and it has made positive impacts across all students. So on this slide, you can see some highlights of the qualities of a warm demander. And though I'd love to dive deep into each one, given our time, I'm just going to pick one example. And this one's probably a good one to focus on, as we talked about earlier about, forgiving ourselves and not trying to be perfect and, setting our bar so high that it's not attainable. And that is productive struggle, which we know is an important part of learning. So a warm demander supports that productive struggle. So if you think about the last time that you learned something new that was really hard, and perhaps it was really frustrating for you, I'll just say off the top of my head, recently my family got into playing disc golf, and I was kind of the last one to join the group. And I started playing, and I was really, really bad at it. And I mean, really bad, where people had to duck when it was my turn to throw. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to quit at one point, but luckily I had my whole family supporting me, and they showed me how to, different ways to throw, how to get my stance going. So it took time to push through that struggle and not want to quit, but I had the support, and that's key. So when we take that productive struggle and couple that with these relationships and building trust with our students, we can support and challenge them because they know that we believe in them, we have their back. And so centering relationships with them really show that we care, and it gives them a reason to care too. Next slide, please, Brett. So how do we create these trusting relationships? Well, another one of my favorite educator researchers is Zaretta Hammond. And so this quote comes from her, and she really builds on and adds to Kleinfeld's work that I just spoke about. She notes that building relationships and establishing what she refers to as learning partnerships are like a garden that needs frequent tending. And so it's really important for us to, whether, again, our working environment, classroom, whatever that looks like for you, that we plant these new relationship seeds early on, so that when we get to the ebb and flow with our teammates, our coworkers, whatever that is, and our students, that we can continue to build and grow those relationships. Now, if you're familiar with her work, you might have heard about what she calls her trust generators. So how do we build that trust with our colleagues and with our students? And I'm just going to choose one from that. But one of my favorites is called selective vulnerability. And this relates, I think, pretty well to the 4 agreements, because a lot of it is about ourselves. And selective vulnerability means sharing aspects of yourself with someone else. And when we share something that makes us vulnerable with others, we're opening the door for connection. And what I like about the word selective is that it means, you get to choose what you feel comfortable in being vulnerable about. So an example might be something I often do with my students is sharing something that was challenging for me as a learner, why it was hard, how I struggled with it and how I overcame it. And I think ultimately what this really is about is that when we share with others, it creates that connection and invites them to hopefully open up and be vulnerable as well. Okay, next slide.
And one thought real quick, Kim, on that, based on experience and what I've read in particular, is being warm with students doesn't mean that they're not going to respect you. And for some people, that's the reaction as well. If I'm warm in my tone or the way I relate to them, then they're not going to respect me as an expert or an authority anymore. And I need to be rigid, and they need to just sit and listen. And that's not the case. The research shows that that's not the case at all, that you can change the tone of your syllabus and students will respond more effectively, reach out to you more frequently, and feel like you are approachable, yet still respect you just as much. There's no significant difference there. So, one of the things there is the research shows that this is powerful, but doesn't break that relationship as you still being the authority, if you will. And then the other thing is I always think of the quote, be firm in your outcomes, but be flexible with the means. And though you're giving students opportunity to do things that resonates more with them, you're giving more choice. And so that's about being a warm demander. You still require them to meet the outcomes, but you're giving them some choice and some buy-in and personalization. So, and seeing great things in the chat too, by the way, thank you.
I was just noticing that too. Yeah. Thank you, Brett. And I think, I think it's layered and it can be very complex. And, I'm just giving you sort of a big picture view of warm demander pedagogy. But I also want to recognize that, we all have different unique identities and things like that. And so what happens in your classroom space is going to be different than me or Brett or, so on, anybody else in this chat and elsewhere. So I do want to acknowledge and recognize that as well, that it's not often a simple thing to do when we're also trying to couple that with boundaries to make sure we still have that credibility, because I think that's important. Okay, so next slide, please.
All right.
Okay, so now how does warm demander pedagogy relate to the 4 agreements? Hopefully you got some snippets of just some of the things that I shared. But I will say, in essence, being a warm demander is also about honoring your personal agreements. And so if you're going to want to stay joyful in your role as an educator, you want to bring these to your experiences. Because let's be real, again, we're complex human beings. And when we come into a classroom or any room for that matter, we don't leave our emotions at the door and just turn on a little button that we just become logical. It doesn't work that way. And so we too need to honor our personal agreements as humans in order to experience that joy. And that means being in touch with our emotions, which is essential for self-care. So relationships, connections, vulnerability, helping others support in their struggle and vice versa. These are all these affective elements that we've been talking about. So what we like to do now is begin with creating a new agreement that befriends your first monster that you drew a little earlier. So we're going to kind of like take that joy stealer monster and befriend it in some way. And that's, again, going to look unique for each of you. So I'm going to just kind of go through a couple ideas to get you thinking about that. What are some of the things that you might consider letting go in order to see that monster differently and have it bring you joy in terms of your passion, for example, in education? For me, one of my biggest joy stealers, sort of at a high level, comes when I feel and or see things that are happening that really seem to be more related to the systems and structures of academe, creating barriers for educators and for students. So when I think about that and think about some of the examples in my own work, to befriend my joy stealer monster, I really want to look at it through the lens of the 4 agreements and find ways to commit to what I can do to counter what is stealing my joy, because I pretty much can't control anything really, as much as I try, but what can I do to counter that and how can I make a difference in doing so? And so part of this self-care is to see your monster differently, see it as a joyful monster. And I think one of the things earlier that the author of the Toltec book was talking about too was kind of, I would want to direct my energy into relationships that matter. And so I would need to sort of free myself of that emotional poison that he talks about that steals my joy. So how can you change your agreement and see your monster differently? So coming back to those 4 agreements, I'm going to give you a few prompts and then we'll have a few minutes so that you can write a new agreement. So which of them can help you befriend your monster, and what is the new agreement under that friendly monster? So think about what was your agreement in that joy stealer context, and now how are you going to sort of contextualize it to a joyful context? And to do that, just take the paper. If you started on a piece of paper, you can just, fold it in half and just do your other monster below. Or if you did Post-its, you can just have a new Post-it so you can look at them side by side. And we'd like you to redraw that monster. But in this version, make the monster joyful, friendly, playful, maybe connecting or talking to someone, all in like 90 seconds or 2 minutes. So we'll pause here so you can spend some time doing that, and we'll give you a little update when we're about 30 seconds out coming back together.
And get creative. I know we're not going to force you to share, but we have a mode for sharing in a little bit where there's going to be this anonymous gallery. So, give it a little bit of effort and enthusiasm as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things Megan had said earlier in some of our conversations is, what about if your monster was dancing? What if you were dancing with your monster? What would that look like?
I love the comment in the chat. I'm drawing mine with babies.
I love that. Yeah.
And you guessed Monsters Inc., right? I really appreciate the chat comments. So many wonderful perspectives. I can see the joy and all the challenge to learning different ways of teaching and educating, but then also the time that takes. So again, it's so clear everybody's focused on their students. Oh, an angelic monster. I hope these get shared. I hope you choose to share some of these. I'm dying to see what you have. So. All right, being aware of time, shall we move on to the next?
Yeah. So great. Let's move forward. Hopefully you've got those transformed monsters. Now we're going to do a different type of activity. Maybe some of you have heard of this before. And this is one of those things we want you to just hold on for a second and wait until we say go. So we're going to have you in the chat, type your new agreement in there, but don't hit send. We want everybody to prop theirs up in chat. Okay, so we'll give you a couple moments to do that. And then we'll do a 3, 2, 1 countdown and tell you when to hit send, and we'll get this chat storm. And the reason you can do that is then you get everybody's thoughts all in there at the same moment, and people aren't writing as they're looking at others and trying to adjust theirs to be, compared to or different than. So we want you to just blurt out your new agreement into the chat. Okay, so I think we've had enough time here. Oops, sorry, shouldn't be using that mouse. Okay, so countdown now, 3, 2, 1, send.
Love it. We're flooding the chat with some joy, right? Joy.
It's a joyful storm.
Yes.
Yeah, travel through that scroll for a moment. Ooh, ferociously positive. Don't take personally.
Consider perspectives.
Don't overexert.
One thing at a time.
Oh, I love
good intentions. Yeah. For good intentions. Agency.
That my tone deaf admin actually has good intentions. That takes me back to the quote earlier about, everybody has something they're battling that you don't know about. And people are trying to be their best for the most part. I believe that. We just go about things differently and we're different roles. So it's that understanding of each other and how might you bridge that relationship. Right. Don't overexert. Yeah. Care for yourself. Don't make
Grace.
assumptions.
Yes. I need to work on. I am working on.
Love these. Okay. Be embracing and patient with your students. Yeah. To say, tell me more and then listen carefully. Yeah. Creating those opportunities for listening, creating those opportunities for others to speak.
I'm going to not taking it personally because students may be doing their best.
Not
Love
making assumptions.
Melinda says, you are enough. I love that. Get people to feel like they are enough. Awesome. Thank you for that. That just, hopefully you felt that stream of joy. So ChatStorm, have any of you done that activity before? You can let us know in the chat, or if you're thinking of doing it. I think it's a great thing. Again, just a different mode of communicating and just blasting that out. Great. So I see a few have. Awesome.
Waterfall. I saw the term volcano chat before.
Yeah. And I heard waterfall as well. Yeah. Love it. Okay. So let's jump forward. We're going to try something different now. So you've got your monsters. Now we'll call it pre and post. And so what you can do is hold your phone up and scan this QR code. It'll take you to a Padlet, a different Padlet. And then there's a plus key under the pre column. And you can click that plus key. And then on your phone down near the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little phone icon, camera icon. Click the camera icon and you can take a picture of your pre-monster. And then toward the top of your phone, you'll see an upload button, or publish, I should say. And that'll publish it into the Padlet. These are anonymous, but if you'd like to put your initials on there, 3 initials maybe, then we can try and align the pre and post. But again, these are meant to be anonymous, so that's not the point, but it's fun sometimes to see how they transformed. And then now repeat those steps for the after column. And we'll go into the Padlet in just a moment and see what evolves. And this is asking you just to take a minute or so to share your monsters up there. And we'll see how this works. This is a new activity we haven't done before, but I think this can be interesting. And also it models another thing that you would be able to do with a Padlet with your students. They're at a distance via Zoom, but how can you bring in what they might be doing individually into the course, into the meeting? Okay, so let me go to the gallery here myself. And did we get that link into the chat? There we go. Awesome, thank you. But you'll be wanting to use the QR code in your phones most effectively. And let's see what we've got going on here. Oh, yes. All right, we've got some populating. It is going to work. People are doing it. So this is one of those joyful moments where you try something new and people participate. So love that. Look at the agreement wrap around on that after monster. And see
Incredible monsters.
Yeah.
They're amazing.
Oh, put in the wrong column. That's all right. And you can feel free to comment on each other's. I didn't put a heart function on this one, I don't think, but you can certainly comment on each other's. Love it. I'm seeing scratch paper, recycled calendar pages maybe, and notebooks.
Yeah, this activity is always a good one. It's great with students. It's great if you work in faculty development or to kick off team meetings, but it's a great way to just get people thinking.
Yeah, and let's come back to that in a moment, Megan, because I want to talk to people about how we did this in person for a live session at a conference, but how you could do it at your campus as a faculty development type activity or something similar with your students, maybe using this differently. So overload, yeah.
I love the ice cream.
Oh, yeah.
So happy.
Treat yourself. I like that. Yeah. Student evaluations, I know. Oh. there's that tension with student evaluations, what is the meaning behind those? Anyway, we won't get into that. Be impeccable. I love that. Love the happy hat and the smile. All right, we won't go through all of them. I apologize if we don't get to it. Let's see, I can go back to the QR code. Yeah, so we had a request for that. So let me put it up here for a moment. We're almost to the hour. So what I'm going to do is actually take us to the wrap up here, but you have the link to the Padlets from today. You have the link to the answer garden. We'll be sending you the recording. You'll have the link to that. So you'll be able to get back into those if you didn't capture them through the chat. But feel free, if you want to at this moment, you can go to the little 3 dots icon at the bottom of the chat and you can download it if you need any of that. But we'll get you all the resources. Okay, so let me go forward. The other thing, yeah, we did this live and we did what's called a gallery walk. So we had these big poster boards in the room and we had people doing these on 2 different colored Post-its. And so when they had their pre and post done, we had them by groups, put them up pre and post side by side, and then people got to do a gallery walk. And then we had them vote for different reasons on the different monsters, and we gave away copies of the 4 Self-Agreements book, a poster of the 4 agreements. So we did some different things like that just to kind of jazz it up a little bit. So just ideas if you're doing that for your faculty development activities potentially. So let me go back. Yeah, so I want to say thank you. And something that I hear my yoga instructor say recently is thank you for everything. I have no regrets whatsoever. So can you leave a class saying something like that and thinking, there were things that I didn't do that I did that weren't perfect. There's things that somebody may have said that I didn't necessarily care for entirely, but still be gracious and realize that it was a moment, it was an experience, and you move on and you go forward with what took place. If there are questions or closing thoughts, please put those in the chat and we'll try and address those across our team. And I do truly want to thank you and Kim and Megan and staff on hand supporting this session, this Continuum of Care series. So like I said, we did the Burnt Out and Overburdened session in December. We had 350 people sign up for that, 360, something like that. We can make the recording available, but you have access to the report. Today's session, of course, and then the next 2 that are coming up, we wanted to give you access to registration now, but we can also send you an email. So we're going to go into the faculty personae study. So we're getting more into the qualitative stuff, and we're pulling out the different personae that evolved from our analysis and what those look like. So just a teaser there on that. You've got the QR to register and the link is in the chat. And then the last is the concept of course care. Now, how can you look at your course and put that care into your course and make changes in a thoughtful way? So we'll talk about our purposeful learning check and how that enables you to make small but powerful changes. It's not this big evaluative 100 objectives type thing. It's more iterative and meets you where you are. So we'll do that session later in the month. I'll pause here and just take in some of your comments and feedback in the chat, and do reach out to us. Maybe I'll go, well, I was going to say I could go to the earlier slide, but maybe we'll just put in our email addresses again, if Kim and Megan, if you wouldn't mind. We'll share those with folks. Feel free to reach out. There we go. All right, and I know I'll be staying on to keep the chat open for a while because there's a lot there, and I'll be reviewing this afterwards. I really appreciate all the participation, and I hope this gave you a lot to think about going forward in your self-care way.